Goes on about American portion sizes, how they're bigger than everywhere, and to be honest, I thought it was a myth. I thought maybe a little bit bigger. Then I ordered a large fries from McDonald's.
Size of this burrito. This is the type of stuff that a European and a British mind cannot comprehend. It's the size of...
For years, Europeans have treated American food as the punchline of the Western world. Too large, too greasy, too sweet, and apparently designed to send anyone with functioning taste buds straight to an early grave. Then, thousands of them arrived for the 2026 World Cup and made one catastrophic mistake. They actually started eating it. Weeks later, the tournament is nearly over, and some visitors are discovering an uncomfortable truth. The food culture they came ready to mock has become one of the things they are least prepared to leave behind. Back in Europe, free refills will disappear, portions will shrink, and endless customization will become a distant memory. No more hidden barbecue joints, menus with hundreds of choices, or enormous plates that somehow started feeling less like excess and more like generosity. America committed the one crime its critics never expected. Its food was far better than the stereotype. 50 states delivered wildly different flavors. Immigrant cultures transformed the menu, and extraordinary meals appeared in the most ordinary places. Now comes the difficult question. After tasting an America that was bigger, stranger, more diverse, and far more delicious than they expected, can European visitors really return home and keep repeating the same old jokes? Join us as we uncover 5 brutal American food shocks European fans experienced firsthand, revealing how the cuisine they arrived ready to condemn became one of the hardest things to leave behind. The first thing European visitors expected American food to do was confirm everything they had already heard about it. Too greasy, too processed, too much cheese, too little sophistication. For years, America had been reduced to the same tired picture: burgers, fries, soda, and portions large enough to qualify as a public health warning. Then they actually started eating here. For many visitors arriving during the 2026 World Cup, the first surprise was not how large the food was. It was how quickly the jokes stopped after the first bite. A properly smashed burger arrived with crisp edges, caramelized onions, melted cheese, and beef, carrying far more flavor than the frozen fast food stereotype suggested. Barbecue was not simply meat drowned in sauce, but something people spent hours smoking over carefully chosen wood. Even ordinary roadside meals could show a level of character that visitors had never associated with American food. And suddenly, the old stereotype became much harder to defend. Part of the misunderstanding comes from the fact that Europe and America often celebrate food differently. In France, culinary pride may be built around technique, tradition, and restraint. In Italy, simplicity can be almost sacred, with a few excellent ingredients protected by generations of rules. Britain has its pubs and Sunday roasts, Spain its tapas culture, and Germany its deeply regional specialties. America rarely asks food to behave so politely. Here, a burger can be stacked until it requires structural engineering. Barbecue can start an argument between entire states. A neighborhood diner can serve pancakes, fried chicken, burgers, and pie under the same roof without feeling the slightest need to apologize for it. To European eyes, that can initially look chaotic. To Americans, it is freedom. That difference matters. American food culture was never built around proving that one tradition was superior to another. It grew through movement, immigration, regional competition, family recipes, roadside businesses, and millions of people constantly asking a very practical question: does it taste good? For American viewers, perhaps none of this feels surprising. They already know that the best barbecue debate can become dangerously personal. They know that the ugly restaurant with 20 pickup trucks outside may be better than the beautiful one with an empty parking lot. And they know that insulting the local burger, pizza, chili, or barbecue style in the wrong city can immediately turn dinner into a history lesson. That pride is easy for outsiders to mistake for excess, but underneath it is something much more serious. Americans are proud of food because food is often tied to where they come from. A recipe can belong to a family. A barbecue style can represent an entire region. A small restaurant can become part of a town's identity. and a dish that looks completely ordinary to a tourist may carry decades of memories for the people who grew up eating it. European visitors did not need to abandon their own extraordinary culinary traditions to recognize this. French cuisine did not suddenly become less elegant. Italian food did not become less sacred. What changed was the assumption that America had nothing equally authentic of its own. Because authenticity does not always arrive on fine china. Sometimes it comes wrapped in paper, dripping down your hands, served by someone who has been making the same thing for 30 years. And once European visitors understood that, American food became much harder to laugh at. The real shock was never that America could make a good burger. It was discovering how much food culture had been hiding behind the stereotype all along. And if the quality surprised them, the amount of food placed in front of them was about to create an entirely different problem. If the quality of American food challenged one European stereotype, the size of it seemed determined to confirm another. A medium drink arrived, looking like a European large. A sandwich required 2 hands and a strategy. Fries appeared beside meals that already seemed complete. And when confused visitors asked whether this was actually normal, Americans simply said yes. For Europeans accustomed to smaller servings, the reaction was predictable. American portions looked excessive, wasteful, and occasionally absurd. In much of Europe, ordering dinner means receiving enough for dinner. In America, it can mean accidentally ordering tomorrow's lunch as well. That is where one important difference appears. Americans are not necessarily expected to finish everything. Taking leftovers home is completely normal. Restaurants provide boxes without ceremony, and an enormous dinner can easily become another meal the next day. What looks wasteful to an outsider can actually be surprisingly practical. Then comes the free refill. For visitors used to paying for every bottle or glass, watching another soda appear without another charge can feel almost illegal. The first refill is surprising. The third begins to raise serious questions about the American business model, yet Americans barely notice. Behind both the giant portions and bottomless drinks is a powerful expectation of value. American customers do not simply want something delicious. They want to feel that what they paid for was worth it. A restaurant serving tiny portions at generous prices may struggle when another place down the road sends customers home full, satisfied, and carrying an extra meal in a box. Of course, America sometimes takes this philosophy to ridiculous extremes. Some burgers resemble construction projects. Desserts arrive prepared for an entire table. Drinks fit into cup holders with the confidence of household appliances. Even Americans laugh at it. But underneath the comedy is something visitors gradually begin to appreciate. In American food culture, generosity is often measured by the absence of scarcity. The plate arrives full. The glass does not stay empty. At family gatherings and backyard barbecues, running out of food can feel more embarrassing than preparing far too much. For American viewers, none of this seems remarkable. Offering someone another serving is simply what a good host does. Making sure a guest leaves full is almost instinctive. European visitors may never agree that anyone needs that many fries. They may still photograph the medium drink before attempting to lift it. But after weeks of free refills, leftovers, and tables that never seem short of food, the joke begins to change. What first looked like pointless excess starts revealing something unexpectedly warm about the country serving it. America does not just like giving people more. As these visitors were about to discover, it also has far more different things to give them than they ever imagined. European visitors may arrive believing they already know American food. Then America starts changing the menu every few hundred miles. Texas has its brisket. The Carolinas can argue for hours over barbecue sauce. Louisiana brings gumbo and Cajun flavors to the table. Chicago defends deep dish pizza. New Mexico puts green chili on almost everything. And Maine has built an identity around lobster. Suddenly, American food begins to sound like a dangerously incomplete description. This is something Europeans should understand better than most. Drive from Italy into France or Spain into Portugal, and food changes with the landscape, history, and local traditions. Europe celebrates those differences through national borders. America often hides them inside one enormous country. Cross a few state lines and barbecue can change its meat, sauce, seasoning, wood, and entire philosophy. A dish considered essential in one region may be almost invisible in another. Even familiar foods like pizza, hot dogs, chili, and sandwiches can trigger arguments over which city makes the real version. Americans take these arguments surprisingly seriously. Ask someone from Texas about brisket, someone from Chicago about pizza, or someone from Louisiana about gumbo, and dinner can quickly become a lesson in geography, family history, and local pride. But regional traditions are only half the story. Generations of immigrants brought recipes from around the world and placed them beside ingredients and cultures already living here. Those traditions changed, mixed, and sometimes created foods that belonged completely to neither place they came from. Tex-Mex grew along the border. New York developed its own pizza identity. California rolls emerged from Japanese influence meeting American tastes. Korean tacos put two culinary traditions into the same tortilla and somehow made the combination feel perfectly at home. This is where European visitors often discover the scale of what they underestimated. In one American city, they can eat Mexican food for lunch, Korean barbecue for dinner, grab a New York-style slice after midnight, and wake up the next morning to Southern biscuits and gravy. None of those experiences need to feel unusual because cultural mixing is not sitting at the edge of American food culture. It helped build it. That does not mean every dish is ancient or untouched by change. Quite the opposite. American cuisine often becomes most interesting when traditions refuse to stay frozen. Recipes travel, ingredients change, communities meet, and something new appears. For outsiders expecting one standardized national menu, this can be deeply confusing. The America they imagined was burgers, fries, and fried chicken repeated from coast to coast. The America they actually encounter is closer to a culinary map with hundreds of local borders nobody bothered to draw. American viewers already know how powerful those invisible borders can be. They know a barbecue debate can divide a room, that one city will proudly insult another city's pizza, and that people can defend a family recipe with the emotional intensity normally reserved for a sports team. That pride matters because regional food gives an enormous country something deeply local. America may share one flag, but it does not always share one dinner. And perhaps that is the biggest surprise for European visitors. They came from a continent famous for culinary diversity and arrived in a country they assumed had very little of its own. Then they discovered that exploring American food could become a journey by itself. The difficult part was no longer finding something worth eating. It was deciding what to try next. After discovering how many different foods America had to offer, European visitors faced an entirely different problem. They had to decide what they actually wanted. An American menu can feel less like a list of dishes and more like a document requiring serious preparation. Burgers, steaks, salads, pasta, sandwiches, seafood, breakfast served at dinner, and enough side options to delay an entire table before anyone has even ordered. Then the questions begin. How would you like the meat cooked? Which side? What dressing? Regular fries or sweet potato? Add bacon, remove the onions, sauce on the side, substitute something else. For visitors from parts of Europe where the dish often arrives largely as the chef intended, this level of control can feel almost uncomfortable. In many traditional European restaurants, the menu reflects a clear culinary philosophy. A smaller selection allows the kitchen to focus on specific dishes, and changing too much can sometimes feel like asking the restaurant to make something it never intended to serve. America approaches the relationship differently. Here, the customer is often expected to have an opinion. Removing an ingredient is normal. Adding another is easy. Swapping a side rarely causes a diplomatic incident. One person wants a burger, another wants pasta, someone else wants a salad, and the child at the end of the table has somehow ordered chicken tenders for the fourth consecutive day. Everyone still eats together. That may be the real purpose behind America's obsession with choice. A huge menu can look excessive until you are traveling with 5 people who want 5 completely different things. Suddenly, having too many options becomes surprisingly useful. Nobody needs to compromise. Split into different restaurants. or quietly order something they never wanted. For European visitors, that freedom can become addictive faster than expected. And America does not stop at customization. The same culture extends into convenience. Food is designed to fit around life rather than forcing life to stop for food. Breakfast can be available late in the day. Dinner can be picked up without leaving the car. A road trip does not require abandoning decent food. And an ordinary Tuesday night does not need weeks of planning. From the outside, this can easily be dismissed as laziness. But Americans tend to see something else: efficiency. A parent driving home with children does not always want a 2-hour dinner. A worker finishing late may not care whether tradition says breakfast ended at 10:30. A family on a road trip wants to keep moving. Convenience gives people back something food critics rarely mention: time. That does not make the slower European approach inferior. A long Italian dinner or an afternoon at a French cafe offers something American efficiency cannot replace. But the reverse is also true. There are moments when people do not want dinner to become an event. They simply want dinner to work. American food culture makes surprisingly little judgment about either choice. Sit down for 2 hours if you want. Pick it up in 10 minutes if you do not. Remove half the toppings. Add 3 more. Eat breakfast at night. Order the same meal every Friday for 20 years. Nobody particularly cares. For American viewers, this freedom is so ordinary that it barely feels like freedom at all. But for visitors accustomed to more rigid menus, shorter service hours, or fewer substitutions, losing that flexibility after returning home can suddenly feel restrictive. Because once you become used to food adapting to your life, adjusting your life around food becomes much harder. And yet, even all that freedom could not prepare European visitors for one final American surprise. Sometimes the most unforgettable meal was hiding in the last place they would ever think to look. By this point, European visitors had learned not to underestimate American food, but they still had to learn one final rule: never judge the restaurant by the building. Some of the most memorable meals in America can appear in places that look completely unremarkable. A barbecue joint beside a highway, a diner hidden behind a gas station, a family restaurant inside a strip mall where the sign appears to have survived several decades and nobody seems particularly interested in replacing it. To European travelers, this can feel like a gamble. Across much of Europe, great food is often connected in the imagination to historic streets, beautiful cafes, carefully designed restaurants, or generations of visible tradition. America can place something extraordinary beside a tire shop and act as though nothing unusual has happened. The building may tell you almost nothing. The parking lot tells you everything. If pickup trucks are filling every space before lunchtime and local families are waiting by the door, Americans know there is probably a reason. These restaurants often survive not because tourists photograph them, but because the same community keeps coming back. That creates a different kind of authenticity. The owner may still be working behind the counter. A recipe may have changed very little in 30 years. Regular customers may not need to look at the menu. Nobody is trying particularly hard to impress strangers because the restaurant already has the approval of the people who matter most, the locals. And once European visitors stop searching only for famous names, America becomes a food treasure hunt. The ordinary diner suddenly matters. The roadside barbecue becomes worth the detour. A market stall can produce the flavor they remember months after returning home. Some of the best discoveries happen precisely because nobody expected anything from them. But American dining has another way of surprising outsiders. Sometimes the food itself refuses to behave normally. Sweet meets salty. Breakfast appears beside dinner. Chicken gets paired with waffles. Biscuits arrive covered in gravy instead of beside tea. A milkshake becomes something people dip fries into, and combinations that initially sound like culinary crimes somehow develop loyal followings. European visitors may hesitate. Americans usually tell them to try it first. That attitude reveals something larger about the culture. American food does not always ask whether two things traditionally belong together. It asks a much more dangerous question: what if they taste good together? Some experiments disappear, others become regional traditions, but the willingness to try remains part of the experience. In a country shaped by different cultures, constantly meeting each other, strict culinary boundaries were never going to survive completely intact. Then, there is the restaurant itself. In America, dinner does not always remain quietly on the plate. Sports play across giant screens, music fills the room, families celebrate birthdays while strangers cheer at the same game. Servers explain their favorite dishes, refill drinks before anyone asks, and occasionally turn an ordinary meal into something visitors remember as clearly as the attraction they visited that afternoon. For Europeans, this can initially feel loud, informal, and unmistakably American. Then they start enjoying it. Because not every memorable meal needs white tablecloths or perfect silence. Sometimes people remember where everyone laughed, what ridiculous dessert arrived at the table, or the tiny restaurant they nearly drove past before deciding to turn around. American viewers understand this instinctively. They know that a restaurant does not need to look expensive to deserve pride. They know that the strangest local dish may be the first thing they insist an outsider try. And they know that recommending a favorite hidden restaurant can feel almost like revealing a family secret. That may be what European visitors ultimately discovered about American food. It was never simply about burgers, giant portions, or endless choices. It was about how Americans use food to welcome people, to represent where they come from, to experiment without asking permission, to turn an ordinary night into a memory, and occasionally to convince a skeptical visitor that everything they had heard before arriving was only part of the story. The World Cup brought millions of eyes to America, but for many visitors, some of the strongest memories may have nothing to do with what happened inside a stadium. They may remember the first burger that silenced the jokes, the refill that never appeared on the bill, the regional dish they had never heard of, the freedom to order exactly what they wanted, or the ugly little restaurant they almost ignored and later wished they could take home with them. Europe will still have its extraordinary cafes, ancient food traditions, and cuisines America could never replace. But perhaps that was never the competition. The real change was much simpler. They arrived believing they already understood American food. They left knowing they had barely tasted it. So which American dish would you put in front of a skeptical European visitor first? Tell us in the comments. And if you want to keep discovering the side of America the headlines rarely show, subscribe and join us for the next journey.